At their peak, early 2000s USC was the coolest program college football had ever seen. They had the most electric players since Bo Jackson and created "I don't believe what I just saw" moments every weekend. You had a quarterback who looked like he was right out of Hollywood, literally getting followed around by TMZ. The biggest music artists, the biggest boxers. Everybody wanted to be a part of it. So did I. It was an actual movie every season. It was just cool. The problem was, though, that they were too cool for college football. So the NCAA decided to stop them. In 2010, they punished USC for allowing Reggie Bush to profit from improper benefits. They said that USC athletes had a relationship with agents that the school either ignored or failed to control. How crazy is that to think about now? This happens literally every day, legally. And let's be honest, the NCAA could have gone after any program in the country if they wanted to for doing the exact same thing. They just chose USC because USC was at the top. But I'm not here to argue fairness. I want to explore what would have happened if the NCAA didn't smother the USC dynasty. No postseason ban, no scholarships lost, no vacated wins. What if USC never got sanctions? For one, Nick Saban wins fewer natties. 2, Oregon never takes over the West Coast. 3, Texas and Oklahoma join the Pac-16. We're talking about all those ripple effects and a whole lot more. Let's go. Let's go back to 2010. Pete Carroll led USC to 7 straight seasons with 11 or more wins, 2 national titles, 3 Heisman winners, the most loaded rosters in college football. Then Pete Carroll left, just months before the NCAA handed USC some of the harshest sanctions the sport had ever seen. A 2-year postseason ban, 30 scholarships lost over 3 years, vacated wins including their 2004 national championship. Reggie Bush was forced to give back his Heisman. And worst of all, USC completely cut ties with them until 2020. Now, Carroll says he didn't leave because of the sanctions, but man, come on. He had to know they were coming. Before the sanctions, they'd won at least 11 games in 7 of the previous 8 years. But after the sanctions, they won 11 games just once in the next 8 years and had 4 head coaches, all of which I played for during my time at USC. But what if that never happened? What if Pete Carroll never left? What if USC never got sanctioned? Pete keeps stacking recruiting classes, keeps producing NFL talent, keeps winning 11 plus games a year. Because once USC faded, there was no one left to stop the SEC from taking over. And if the NCAA hadn't stepped in, shoot, USC would still be running college football. When USC got hit, college football didn't wait. Alabama quickly took over as the face of college football. Oregon took over the West, and Larry Scott took over the Pac-12. Alabama had already won a title in 2009. But when USC faded, there was no one left outside of the SEC to consistently challenge them on the national stage. Meanwhile, Oregon stepped into the West Coast void. They made the title game in 2010. They won 11 games 5 years in a row, and built a brand that started dominating West Coast recruiting. USC, the previous decade, had owned that recruiting pipeline. But now, a lot of kids from Southern California or Texas that may have went to USC were heading up to Eugene. And then there was the commissioner. Larry Scott was spending like USC wasn't in trouble. He made himself the highest paid commish, leased downtown San Francisco office space, and flew first class to non-essential events. He even used Pac-12 funds to rent a luxury suite at the MGM Grand during the conference tourney. Then he passed on adding Texas and Oklahoma, saying, quote, "We could have expanded, but the deal didn't make any sense at the end of the day for us, especially given the position that we are in. There is a very high bar." The article then goes on to say that Larry Scott determined that Texas, Oklahoma, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State weren't able to clear that bar. To cut Larry Scott some slack, I've heard that it was USC and Stanford decision makers that said, you know what, Oklahoma State and Texas Tech, their academic standards aren't up to par, so that's why we're passing, while Texas and Oklahoma said, hey, we're a package deal with our in-state rivals. Regardless though, obviously a decade later, a huge missed business opportunity for the Pac-12. And imagine if USC never got hit. They're still contending today. Still the brand of the Pac-12. Oregon, still very good, but not the brand. Alabama still had a dominant run, but not as much. And Larry Scott, well, he might have had more resources to make more bad money decisions with. Because when USC fell, and this is the point I'm making here, college football shifted. And if they didn't, I'd make the case that we'd be looking at a very different sport and conference landscape today. This brings us to Penn State. A little bit of a curveball in this story, but USC sanctions are related to Penn State sanctions, at least in my opinion. Sure, Penn State got punished for Jerry Sandusky, but just a few years earlier, the NCAA got pushed back for maybe giving too extreme of sanctions to USC, when deep down there's a lot of programs around the country knowing they did the exact same thing. The Penn State situation was much worse than the Reggie Bush USC situation. Let's compare the sanctions. Initially, the penalty for Penn State's more, 4 years instead of 2 years for a postseason ban. 40 scholarships lost instead of 30. But I think the NCAA felt the blowback of what they had done to USC. It wasn't the death penalty like SMU, but man did they punish the Trojans. I think that blowback was a factor in why the punishments were ultimately reduced. It only ended up being a 2-year postseason ban, only 20 total scholarships. Having lived it firsthand at USC, the difference of having another 10 scholarships lost and being punished for another recruiting cycle is a big deal. I'm not saying Penn State should have been punished more. I'm just saying when you compare their penalty for what they did compared to what USC did and that penalty, it's crazy. Pete Carroll's exit led to 4 USC head coaches in the next 3 years. Kiffin, Sark, Orgeron, Helton. In 2009, Lane Kiffin was the youngest head coach in college football. He had 1 decent season at Tennessee, but if Pete never leaves, he never jumps to USC that early. In this timeline, I think he still returns to USC, but as the OC, learns under Carroll just a little bit longer, and calls plays. And when Pete eventually steps down, Lane takes over without the burden of sanctions that he had to deal with in reality. Meanwhile, his buddy Steve Sarkisian, he stays at UW. And no Sark to USC means that maybe Chris Peterson never takes that job. All the while in Seattle, they never win a Super Bowl because Pete Carroll never decided to go there. Because if USC never implodes, Nick Saban never hires either of them. Lane Kiffin doesn't modernize Alabama's offense. No spread, no hurry-ups, no RPO. Maybe no run of elite quarterbacks that the Tide had. Maybe Sark still finds his way to Bama after UW, but without Sark, there's no 2020 Heisman for Devontae Smith, no Mac Jones breakout, no perfect season. So yeah, Bama still probably wins a few titles in the 2010s, don't get me wrong. But the entire style that defined their dynasty from 2015 onwards, that might not have happened so quickly. From 2015 to 2020, college football was ruled by 3 names: Nick Saban, Urban Meyer, Dabo Swinney. They won 5 national titles in 6 years. But if USC was still USC, that monopoly might have cracked. Nothing is more indicative of the rise of the Big Three and the fall of USC than the 2020 recruiting class. Bryce Young, DJ Uiagalelei, and CJ Stroud were the top 3 quarterback recruits in the country. All 3 grew up in USC's backyard. All 3 went elsewhere: Alabama, Clemson, and Ohio State. If USC had kept the dynasty alive, there's no way all 3 of those guys would have left. You're telling me Pete Carroll on the recruiting trail loses all 3? Yeah, no shot. They would have been playing in front of 90,000 fans under the lights in McCauley. No splitting time in Columbus or getting benched in Clemson. With Carroll still running the show, we'd be talking about a Big 4, with the Trojans right in the center of it. In 2021, Texas and Oklahoma approached the SEC about joining the conference. If you remember, the Pac-12 could have had them a decade earlier. What followed was the domino effect of conference realignment, and that next domino to fall was USC and UCLA jumping ship to the Big Ten. If USC was never put on sanctions and never left their top dog spot, and the branding of the Pac-12 hadn't fallen, the pressure for the Trojans to jump ship to a new conference wouldn't have existed. And by 2024, the Pac-12 as we knew it pretty much effectively dissolved. Then the conference got wind that Colorado was jumping to the Big 12, so Oregon and Washington left to the Big 10, and then Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah followed Colorado to the Big 12. One by one, the West Coast fractured. Why? The Pac-12 had no media deal, no stability, and no flagship program to rally around. The Big 10 now stretches coast to coast, the SEC has strengthened their stronghold, and the Pac-12 is down to just 2. But if USC had never been sanctioned, they could have been that anchor. Maybe Texas and OU don't turn east, they turn west. Maybe the Pac-12 becomes the Pac-16. Maybe the entire balance of power in college football doesn't shift so dramatically to the Eastern time zone. Instead, as we know, the sport consolidated around the South and the Midwest. And the Pac-12, It didn't just lose teams, it lost its future. So much of what we know about college football today might not have happened if USC never got hit with sanctions. The coaching trees, the dynasties, the playoff, even the death of the Pac-12. One NCAA decision changed the sport forever. If you like this kind of alternate history, I've got more videos on the way. So make sure you're subscribed and hit that like button down below as well while you're at it. Drop a comment as well of the biggest what if in sports you think we missed. I'll see you guys in the next one.